Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Unbound. I am Beth Curry. Today's chapter that I'm going to be reading for you is called When Mom Couldn't Help, and it takes us back to the summer of 2005, so 20 years ago. Definitely an epically shitty summer for me. Everything kind of fell apart at once. Brian nearly died. I discovered I was miraculously pregnant after being told that we couldn't have kids, and Mom broke her ankle the day after I found out. And those three events kind of all happened in the same 2.5 day period. So it was pretty wild. Anyway, I needed my mom desperately, and she couldn't be there. Not because she didn't want to, but because she physically couldn't be there. So I'll just get to it. When Mom couldn't help. There are moments in life when we most need our mothers, those critical junctures when we long for the comfort, wisdom, and steady presence that only they can provide. For me, the summer of 2005 became a chaotic mess of such moments, a time when I desperately needed my mother's guidance and support, yet found myself in the painful position of watching her struggle with her own crisis instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just a few years earlier, when Mom had undergone major surgery, I had been the one making regular drives from our home in Waterdown to help her, folding laundry, managing household tasks, and tending to her wound care. I remember the quiet rhythm of those visits, the role reversal that happens when a daughter becomes a caregiver to her mother. It was exhausting, but also strangely intimate, those hours spent in practical service, creating a different kind of closeness between us. Now, when my own life was unraveling, I found myself yearning for that steady mother presence, the one who'd always known what to say, what to do. But life rarely arranges itself according to our needs, and the summer of 2005 proved to be a masterclass in this painful truth. The groundwork for this difficult period had been laid a couple of years prior. In 2002, after nearly 6 years of marriage and trying to conceive, Brian and I had received devastating news. Parenthood wasn't in our future. This medical verdict reopened old wounds. I had lost a child many years before, leaving me adrift in a sea of grief with no clear shore in sight. We had processed this loss as best we could, trying to envision a life different from the one we'd planned. Then came July 2005, about a month after we'd returned from some time in Los Angeles. Brian began experiencing concerning symptoms, pain in his upper back that soon extended to his left chest and down his left arm. With his history of heart surgeries, any such symptom triggered immediate alarm. What followed were weeks of medical visits, inconclusive diagnoses, and mounting fear as his condition worsened rather than improved. I'd like to call my mom, I remember thinking countless times during those early weeks. Not because she could fix anything medically, but because mothers have a way of holding space for our fears while somehow making them more manageable. And she was great, wanting to be there as she always could be, praying for us and with us, encouraging us, loving on us, always available. Then came August 4th, a date permanently etched in my memory. Despite being told it was impossible, I discovered I was pregnant. This miracle, because that's truly what it was, arrived wrapped in the most complicated packaging imaginable. Instead of the unreserved celebration such news deserved, I found myself caught in an emotional tornado. Joy tangled with terror as I worried about Brian's increasingly serious health concerns. And then, just one day later, on August 5th, the phone rang at 7:30 in the morning, jolting us from sleep. Brian answered, and I heard only his side. "Oh no, do you want me to call 911? It was Mom. She had fallen while getting ready for work, severely breaking her ankle. As Brian handed me the phone, I heard her crying, a sound so rare it immediately multiplied my concern. Mom didn't cry easily. Whatever had happened was serious. I threw on clothes and raced across town, trying and eventually succeeding in reaching my father at work. When I arrived at their house, I found Mom on the bathroom floor, having dragged herself around using her good leg to push. The ankle was visibly damaged, clearly broken, though thankfully not a compound fracture. "I was just brushing my teeth," she explained through pain-tightened words. Turned to get something from above the toilet. My foot slipped, my ankle popped out, and I buckled. The paramedics arrived shortly after my dad, and we watched helplessly as they loaded her into the ambulance. Later that day came the diagnosis, a severe break requiring immediate surgery, followed by several weeks off work and 4 to 6 months recovery period. In a cruel twist of timing, Mom's surgery and subsequent bed-bound recovery at home coincided exactly with the period when I needed her support. I was newly pregnant, a high-risk pregnancy given my medical history, and simultaneously watching Brian's health deteriorate in frightening ways. During this time, his symptoms had progressed to include voice changes, and an X-ray had revealed something questionable in his throat. Words like lymphoma and aneurysm were now part of our daily vocabulary, and my nights were haunted by worst-case scenarios my mind couldn't stop generating. My new fear is my diet, I wrote in my journal during this time. I'm hungry all the time. I'm petrified of gaining weight. Being big already, I'm not allowed to gain more than 15 to 20 pounds. These concerns about weight gain seem almost trivial in retrospect, but they represented something deeper, my desperate need for control in a situation where everything felt dangerously beyond my grasp. Food was something I could manage when Brian's health, my mother's recovery, and even the stability of this pregnancy seemed to exist in a realm beyond my influence. The following weeks unfolded with brutal intensity. Brian's condition was eventually diagnosed as an aortic dissection, the same condition that had killed actor John Ritter. The mass identified earlier was actually an aneurysm, and the news came with terrifying statistics. If it ruptured before surgery, his survival chances dropped to 50%. We learned that his aorta had been dilated since the previous February, but through medical oversight, this critical information had never been communicated to us. In a 7-day period, he had been transferred to a hospital 2 hours away and was met with a thoracic surgeon who decided the aneurysm was so big he refused to operate. Brian was brought back closer to home. We're both very scared about the financial part of this, I confessed in my journal, especially with me being pregnant. I only work part-time, and even though I got a raise I asked for, it's still not enough. And he has LTD at work, but that won't kick in for 4 months. Until then, he has to go on UI. Both of those are only a portion of his salary. These practical worries existed alongside the more profound fear of losing Brian entirely. All I can think about is how much more I need Brian than God does, I wrote after he was moved to the critical care unit. Throughout this harrowing journey, I felt the absence of my mother's support acutely, not because she didn't want to help, but because she physically couldn't. Confined to bed rest after her surgery, she was facing her own painful recovery. The timing seemed almost deliberately cruel. Just when I needed her most, she was unavailable in ways neither of us could control. This forced absence created a particular kind of grief, one that lived alongside my fears for Brian, my anxiety about the pregnancy, and my practical concerns about our future. It was the grief of missing someone who was still present, of needing someone in a capacity they simply couldn't fulfill. Mom did what she could from her bed, offering phone calls and prayers, listening when I could make time to visit her. But the physical presence I craved, the mother who could have come to stay with me, who could have accompanied me to hospital visits, who could have taken over cooking and cleaning while I focused on Brian's care, that mother was temporarily beyond reach. In her absence, I found support from unexpected sources. My sister-in-law, Allie, took me for an emergency chiropractic appointment when stress caused my debilitating back spasms. My chiropractor not only treated me for free, but gave us a $100 grocery store gift card. Friends and extended family members stepped in to fill practical gaps, offering rides, meals, and company during the endless hospital waits. Brian's surgery on August 17th lasted 6.5 hours. The next day, he required additional surgery to address internal bleeding. As much as I wanted to see him in ICU, I wrote afterward, it's a sight I wish I could forget, but don't know if I ever will. Eventually, doctors placed him in a medically induced coma for almost a week. Against considerable odds, Brian recovered. He was released from the hospital in mid-September, and the pregnancy continued successfully despite the extreme stress. Months later, our son Crew was born, the miracle child we'd been told we couldn't have. Looking back on that tumultuous summer, I'm struck by the complexity of needing someone who wants to be there for you but can't. Mom and I never discussed it explicitly at the time, both of us too consumed by our respective crises to meta-analyze our changing relationship. But I know she felt the absence as keenly as I did. Being unable to support your child through difficulty creates its own unique form of maternal suffering, and I couldn't support her very well either. What I couldn't fully appreciate then, but understand now as I navigate Mom's cognitive decline, is how those experiences prepared me for our current reality. Once again, I find myself needing a version of my mother that isn't accessible, though for very different reasons. Like in that summer of 2005, I must find ways to move forward without the specific kind of support I most crave. The parallel isn't exact, of course. Mom's broken ankle healed. Dementia offers no such resolution. But the emotional skill set I developed then, finding strength in absence, building support networks beyond my mother, learning to parent myself in new ways, serves me now as I face her cognitive changes. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from that time was learning that love persists even when traditional expressions of it become impossible. Mom couldn't physically care for me during my 2005 crisis, but her love remained constant, finding alternative expressions within her limitations. Similarly, though dementia has altered how Mom can show love now, the essential bond between us endures. In relationships shaped by caregiving, whether parent to child to parent, or spouse to spouse, there inevitably comes a time when the flow of care must change direction. Sometimes this happens gradually over decades. Sometimes, as in our case, it occurs in sudden, unexpected reversals. But underneath these shifts, the foundation of love remains, adapting and finding new channels of expression when old ones become blocked. That terrible, wonderful summer taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is accepting what another person cannot give, rather than demanding the impossible. Mom couldn't be my active caregiver then, just as she cannot be my wise advisor now. But in both cases, what matters most, our connection, our shared history, the love that transcends practical expressions, remains intact. And in that essential truth, I find a measure of peace. When I look back on that summer, what stands out most isn't just the chaos or the fear. It's that aching space where I needed my mom and she just couldn't be there, in the ways that she had always been before. I think a lot of us have been in that position at some point, wanting someone who's kind of always been our rock, our grounding force, and finding that for reasons out of anyone's control, they just can't, step into that role this time. There's a really specific kind of grief in that, I think. It's not the grief of losing someone entirely, but losing access to the part of them that you've kind of always relied on. And like I've said before, and I will say again, and I've said that before, and I will say it again, psychologists sometimes call that ambiguous loss. So, when the person is still here, but their role in your life changes, whether because of illness or distance, or in my case, overlapping situations. It's disorienting because, the love is still there, but the comfort feels out of reach. So it's kind of a mind fuck, like it's weird how that, you can't make sense of it. Like it's weird. What that summer taught me though was something that I probably couldn't have learned any other way. And that sometimes, that love isn't expressed through action or presence. It's an endurance. It's in knowing that even when someone can't show up for you the way that they want to, their love is still there under all of that. And, and it will be there and it will always be there. Like it's a, you know that maybe right then it's not happening, but it doesn't mean it's gone forever. I've learned that love can stretch and it can adapt and it can keep its shape, even when everything else around it is breaking, falling apart, whatever. So I think that's maybe the takeaway for anyone listening who's been through something similar when you've needed somebody and they weren't able to meet you there. It doesn't mean that they didn't love you enough. Sometimes it just means that life demanded a little bit too much of both of you at the same time. And the other piece, too, is learning to parent ourselves, to recognize, the person we'd normally turn to can't help. We kind of have to become, even if it's just temporary, the one who studies ourselves. That doesn't mean, being stoic or pretending that we don't need anyone. It means learning to find comfort in different places, like in your friends or in your faith, in your community, or even just in your own resilience. That experience for me, as painful as it was, it ended up preparing me for later seasons of my life, like now, as I face my mom's cognitive decline. I think it's the same lesson, just in a different form. how to love someone even as their ability to give back changes. So if you're in that kind of season right now, if you're missing someone who's still here, know that it's okay to grieve that. But also know that, love doesn't disappear just because the expression changes. I think that the purest form of love is kind of holding space for one another, even when neither of you can fix a damn thing. Yeah, so I guess that's all I'm going to say. I do have a couple of questions from listeners here, so I'm just going to jump into those real fast and we'll wrap it up. First one is from KP. You've mentioned several times that writing has been healing for you, but is it ever re-traumatizing? Does revisiting these painful memories in such detail ever make things worse? Yes, it does. Some chapters were really, really hard to write, like that 16-hour day of just nonstop looping after Dad died. The Truth About Rainbows chapter, for sure. And this one about 2005 that I just read. There's days where I have to stop writing because I'm maybe crying too hard or just too burnt out, days when kind of revisiting that trauma feels like living it all over again. But what I have found is that the re-traumatization is temporary. The healing is lasting, getting these stories out and giving shape to the chaos and sharing them with people who understand, knowing that I might be helping somebody else, that creates something meaningful from the pain to me. Would it be easier to never write about any of this? Maybe, but I definitely don't think it would be better. Next question is from Samantha. Beth, you've talked about forgiveness in previous episodes, and it really resonated with me. I'm wondering, have there been other significant moments in your life where forgiveness played a major role? How did you learn to forgive? That's a thoughtful question. Yes, there have been other times when forgiveness became essential. And honestly, some of the most important lessons about it came from watching my parents forgive me first. So there was a situation years ago, decades ago, when I loaned a friend a significant amount of money. And that money actually had to come from my parents because I just didn't have it at the time. This was someone I trusted completely. He knew where the money came from. He knew what it meant, and he just ghosted me. Completely disappeared. The worst part wasn't losing the money. It was, facing my parents. I tried desperately to pay them back, but I never managed to repay it in full. They had trusted me. I trusted him, and I was left holding the responsibility for both broken trusts, and that sucked. But my parents, they forgave me, not with lectures or with shame or anything like that, but with like a grace I didn't feel that I deserved. And that experience taught me something profound. Forgiveness isn't about the other person earning it. It's about choosing to not let bitterness poison you, My parents could have held that over me for years. They weren't the type of people who would. But, there are some people out there who do that. And instead, they showed me what it looks like to release resentment, even when you've been legitimately wronged. The lesson kind of became crucial later when, I had to walk away from some friendships. There's one in particular, a friendship that I thought, would last forever. It was someone I'd been close to for a long time, but over the years, I guess I just started noticing patterns that didn't sit right with me. She often surrounded herself with people who thrived on gossip, like what I can only describe as like mean girls who were directly cruel to me, and to my family and people I cared about. The thing about gossip that I've learned, both from psychology and painful experience, it's never really about truth. Research shows, I've read somewhere, I'm trying to remember where, because it was like recent that I read it. Gossip serves a social function. It bonds people together through shared information, but it also creates an in-group and an out-group. And, when people gossip, they're often just reinforcing their own social position by diminishing someone else's, right? And the content, it's filtered through bias, assumption, and most of the time malice as well. And by the time, a story passes through multiple people, it kind of bears little resemblance to reality, but people choose to believe it because it serves a purpose for them. It validates their existing opinions and it entertains them and it makes them feel included in the knowing. But yeah, with this friend, the way that she gossiped to me made it crystal clear she was doing the same about me. And the cruelty directed at people I loved, people who gained information obviously through her, because I didn't know these people. She was the connection. She never, she was bothered by it, but, not enough for it to have changed a whole lot. And I'll get back to that in a second. But I just realized, our definitions of true friendship looked completely different because I don't know, walking away from that friendship, it was hard. She hurt me, she hurt my family, she hurt people I cared deeply about. And I've since learned, and this is what I was alluding to, she's continued those friendships with the same crowd. She may have taken a little bit of a break there, but she's back at it. And you know what? That's absolutely her right. I genuinely hope that if those relationships haven't evolved into something healthier, that everyone involved feels at peace with how they treat each other and other people. But, it's no longer my business. If me and my circles are part of their gossip sessions, I don't care. I simply don't care. I know my truth, and I know the truths of the incredible humans that I surround myself with. And we don't partake in that stuff. But yeah, forgiving her didn't mean pretending that the hurt didn't happen or that her behavior was acceptable. It meant choosing not to carry this weight of that betrayal into my future. It meant accepting that some people will never see situations the way that you do, and that's okay. You don't need their validation to know your own truth. And, in my book, The Weight of Truth, it's coming up 2026, and I will be doing a podcast, season 3. Just losing all my numbers here. Season 3 will be about it. There's a huge portion about forgiveness in there, and it'll all make sense. That was the first time I ever chose to really, really forgive somebody who really, really, really fucked me up. Anyway, the forgiveness that my parents showed me when I made that costly mistake with the loan, that became my template. They taught me that cliche, another word I couldn't think of, that holding on to resentment is kind of like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. You can forgive somebody and still maintain boundaries. You can release that bitterness while acknowledging real harm was done. And in that case, real harm was done, for sure. And forgiveness, too, I've learned it's not a one-time event. It's a practice. And I'll talk about this a lot down the road. And again, like I said, in season 3 of my show, some days are easier than others. Some wounds need to be forgiven again and again until those super sharp edges kind of smooth themselves out, right? But every time I choose forgiveness over resentment, I'm honoring what my parents taught me during one of my biggest failures. And that's that grace is stronger than grudges. And I would say that freedom comes from letting go. So thank you, Samantha, for your question. Very long answer for you. Next episode, I'm going to continue with more chapters. And if you have any questions, you can send them to unboundwithbethcurry@gmail.com or join the Facebook group. If you want to support the show, ko-fi.com/Unbound podcast. Everything's in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit authorbethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/Unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.